Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Equine Business Network webcast, Best Practices for a Safe and Efficient Equine Facility, the fifth and final webcast in the Horse Industry Labor Force series. Please remember that you can find additional information on tonight's topic in the course site, including the recording of tonight's webcast, a PDF version of the presentation, additional resources, and an interactive activity. The presenter tonight is Karen Waite, an equine extension specialist at Michigan State University and a PhD candidate in sports psychology. Karen teaches and advises equine students in the MSU Department of Animal Science. In her extension role, she coordinates the Adult Equine Extension Program. In addition, she oversees the Youth Equine Extension Program and is active with the Extension Horse Quest. She teaches a variety of equine courses, assists with the MSU Horse Judging Team, and is faculty advisor to the MSU Equestrian Team. Please note that you are able to ask questions during the presentation via the text chat on the left of your screen. And as a reminder, the presentation today will be recorded and uploaded to the EBN course site if you want to review the talk at a later date. And at this time, I will turn the presentation over to Karen.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And I'm looking forward to our talk tonight. And it's great to see so many of you. So thanks a lot for coming. Coming to your office or your home or your bedroom or wherever you're doing this. And we'll get started. So just as we consider this particular presentation, it doesn't hurt to just do a quick review of what best practices are. And best practices are kind of a buzzword, definitely, in the business community. But a best practice is a method or technique that has consistently shown results superior to those achieved with other means, and that's used as a benchmark. So that means it's a place to start, and a best practice can evolve to become better as improvements are discovered over time. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to consider this evening. What might be best practices on your particular facility? And obviously, all of you have different facilities or different facilities that you're involved in. So it's very, very difficult to say, okay, this is the way you should do it all the time. But what I hope this presentation does is just get you to thinking about places where you might develop some best practices on your farm, and consider some things about your own facility where you could establish best practices and then share those with your employees. So just by means of some introduction, and you may have heard some of these already on our previous webcasts during this series, but there are approximately 9.2 million horses in the United States, and 3.9 million of those horses are involved in recreational activities, and 2.7 are involved in shows and competitions. But for the purposes of this presentation, the important point is that the horse industry sustains about 1.4 million full-time equivalent jobs. And we know that those jobs can take a variety of different perspectives. They can look much differently depending on your facility. But just to give myself a little bit of information in regards to who I'm talking to, we're going to start with our very first poll. So Lauren, if you could put up the poll. And the question for the poll is, what is your involvement in the equine industry? So if you could just take a second and click which of these best describes you. We'll try to make things a little interactive this evening. All right. I counted a while ago, but I think we're close. Just take about 5 more seconds, and figure out what best describes you. And okay, so we have one person who owns or manages a boarding facility, 4 that are primarily riding instructors, 3 that are identifying themselves as trainers, 0 that own or manage a breeding facility, and that's very interesting to me, but not necessarily surprising in the current climate. and then 7 where more than one of the above is true. And I had a feeling that that would definitely be the case. It's certainly not unusual to have boarding facilities that also have lessons, or trainers clearly give lessons as well. So no surprise that more than one of the above is true, but that does help me get a feel for what you're up to. And Lauren, if you could go ahead and close the poll. All right, we'll continue on. So in these areas that you're all involved in the horse industry, it's important to remember that working with horses is a potentially dangerous endeavor. And the easily identifiable or accessible information is primarily related to youth, but it still is good food for thought. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission reported that approximately 23,000 youth under the age of 20 were treated annually in emergency departments for equestrian injuries. And of course, what people automatically go to typically is that these accidents probably happen while riding horses. But we know that 20 to 30% of the accidents are actually when the handler is either leading or grooming the horse. And clearly, those are things that our employees or people that are working on our farms would be engaged in on a pretty consistent basis. So making sure that we have best practices from a safety perspective is a key part of your business and running your facility. We know further that this number is not terribly different than the number of youth that are injured in other on-farm accidents. And we do know that non-fatal equestrian-related injuries to youth can cost an average of $945.6 million per year, which clearly is a high number. So again, for the purposes of this evening, we're going to spend some time talking about how you can improve the safety and efficiency of your facility. And by and large, because as I said in the beginning, every facility is a little bit different, the way that I would encourage you to use this information in this talk is through increasing awareness of the hazards that may be on your facility, by making a conscious effort to prepare for emergency situations and daily activities, and then by discussing potential safety hazards and emergency procedures with your workers, or even conducting more formal training. And as we go through this presentation, I'll give you several ideas in regards to formal training opportunities that we might be able to help provide. So in general, the topics we'll cover are youth employment on the farm, and we'll go through that fairly quickly because I know that there has been one webinar at least where that was covered quite extensively. But for those that were not on that particular webinar, we'll just touch on it briefly. Hazardous occupations in agriculture, horse behavior issues, handling animals, feeding practices, drugs and other chemicals, machinery and equipment, environmental hazards, and then training opportunities for staff. And this was just the list that I came up with of things that facility owners would need to be concerned about from a safety and employment perspective. So as some of you might remember, in the last year or so, there was quite an uproar in regards to proposed changed legislation in regards to youth working on farms. And while that legislation never quite came to pass, I don't think there's any argument that it's important for continued vigilance and enhanced farm safety. We need to make sure that we consider those factors, especially considering the statistics I just shared. But this particular quote was taken from an article by Melissa O'Rourke in a recent publication. But some of what she shared was, again, the statistics we'll go over quickly in regards to youth employment on farm, because it is clear that a lot of times workers on horse farms may be youth. They may be youth in your own family. That's pretty common in equine facilities. Or they may be people that you're hiring. So youth of any age may work at any time in a job on a farm owned or operated by their parents. So that's the first point to keep in mind. Youth over age 16 and may work in any farm job at any time. And youth age 14 and 15 may work outside of school hours only in jobs not declared hazardous by the Department of Labor. And we'll talk about hazardous activities in a moment. Youth age 12 and 13 may work outside of school hours in non-hazardous jobs on farms that also employ their parents or with written parental consent. And then youth under age 12 may work outside of school hours in non-hazardous jobs with parental consent, but only on farms where none of the employees are subject to minimum wage requirements. So that would be the small farms. And I used this picture not because these young people are particularly working on a farm, but I kind of thought, my dream job would probably be to socialize Labrador puppies. And those kids get to do that right now. So that's why I shared that particular picture. But that gives us a summary of what youth can do on farms, should you actually be employing youth. But we do need a little more definition in regards to what constitutes hazardous occupations specific to equine facilities. So I went through that list and pulled out the things that would primarily be experienced or done on a horse farm. So things like operating a tractor over 20 PTO horsepower or connecting or disconnecting an implement or any of its parts, operating a hay mower or baler, operating a power post hole digger, working in a yard, pen, or stall occupied by a stud horse maintained for breeding. Now, none of you identified yourselves as owning or managing a breeding farm, but you still may have horses. If you have a boarding facility or a training facility, you may have horses that meet that definition. Or riding on a tractor as a passenger or helper. So now we have our next poll. If you could share that, Lauren. And our next question is, and this, you just have to be honest, you'll be anonymous, but someone has experienced an injury on my farm or the farm where I work while doing one of the things mentioned in this particular slide. So one of these hazardous activities. Okay, so this is a very safe group or a very lucky group, one or the other. And it's good that you're on this webinar. So we have, although it would probably also be good if the people who did experience such activities or such mishaps were on the webinar too. But we have one person who has experienced someone being injured while conducting one of these activities, and 20 of you that have not. So, good. All right, Lauren, you could go ahead and close that, and we'll move on to our next slide. Those hazardous activities that I just described, there was just the one that really involved an actual horse, as you may have noticed. So that's something to keep in mind. We're usually, as horse people, pretty in tune with what goes on with horses, but we maybe consider less some of those other hazardous activities, and we'll talk about those things as we go through the list here. But one of the most important things that I've witnessed, and I work pretty closely with the farm here at Michigan State, and we have lots and lots of student employees working there as well. And the most important thing that we can help our employees understand is basic horse behavior. If young people or older people who are working on your facility, it really makes no difference how old they are. If they either haven't spent a lot of time around horses or they have spent more time around single horses or small numbers of horses, they don't always have a solid understanding of horse behavior. And this was, I'll be completely honest, I grew up I was in 4-H all during my growing up years, but I had one horse at a time. And I never really learned a lot about horse behavior until I got to college. And it's critical information. So I'm just going to flip through a few slides on basic horse behavior, and you might consider how you can share this information with your employees. We have full courses with My Horse University on horse behavior and welfare, as well as some webinars that are free that you could share with your employees. But one important piece to keep in mind is that horses have a very strong fight or flight instinct, and it's important that your volunteer or your employees understand that. They're creatures of prey, So their first instinct is to run from something that threatens them or something that they're scared of. And if they can't run, then they'll typically fight. So we control horses quite well, actually, or we train horses to control that instinct. That's why we can do all of the things that we do with horses, because they are willing to control their basic instincts in a variety of situations. But ultimately, they are still horses, and if they become extremely scared or startled by something, they'll revert to this particular innate tendency. And accidents are often a result of this particular characteristic. I don't know how many times I've seen horses that are tied, for example, be startled by something, sit back and panic. And I have seen some instances, fortunately, most of the ones I've seen have involved a broken halter or broken lead rope as opposed to a broken neck in a horse, but that is certainly a possibility too. So it's important that employees understand that. It's also important that they understand herd dynamics. As herd animals, which we often don't think of horses as because we're used to working with them one-on-one in a lot of circumstances, especially in training and lesson barns, we don't necessarily think about the fact that they're also innately herd animals. And so within a herd, if people are working with horses in groups, there are dominance hierarchies established within those groups of horses. And so the employees should have an understanding of that herd structure. And when you move horses into different groups, there's usually some reshuffling, as I'm sure many of you are aware, some reshuffling of that structure and that dominance hierarchy. And so there may be a few changes. But employees should understand that they can use dominance hierarchies to their advantage, especially as it relates to catching horses or if you're moving groups. Oftentimes, we've had situations, this doesn't happen often, but we have had situations at MSU where we've had groups of horses get out, and the best way to catch a large group of horses without having to have 20 halters is to catch the one who is the dominant one and lead them back to where they need to be. And more often than not, the majority of them will just follow that horse. That could be very handy on turkey. Other important senses that horses have that are a huge part of keeping people safe when working with them. I'll go back to that, but they're the same senses in a lot of respects that humans consider as well. But a horse's vision, smell, taste, hearing, and sense of touch are all key to working with them, as is common sense. But as many of you know, common sense is not always that common. But helping your employees understand that horses don't see the same way we do, that their field of vision is different in that they are prey animals, so their eyes are on either side of their head. They see different things out of their left eye than they see out of their right eye. The fact that they can't see their feet particularly well and they can't see right in front of them or right behind them is all critical information when making decisions in regards to handling horses. They have a blind spot right in the middle of their forehead, which can also be useful at times. But really just helping employees understand what they can and can't see and that they don't see like a human. It's not unusual, especially for young people who don't understand that particular fact and don't expect a horse to behave a certain way because they see the scary object, the human sees the scary object. Why is this horse now spooking at something? Well, a lot of times it's because the horse didn't see it the same way that the human did. This particular slide just details a comparison of what humans can see as far as field of vision and how far a human can see as compared to how far a horse can see, and the differences in what they can see from a color perspective. So horses can see almost all the way around their body. They can see things that are behind them that a human might not see. So helping your employees understand that a horse can see something potentially behind it that the human may not have noticed, and that can potentially cause a jump or a startle. Again, this just gives you another viewpoint of the way a horse's vision works when it's moving. So the shaded area that is designated as peripheral vision is what that horse is seeing out of its right eye. They do have binocular vision that's very similar to ours, about 4 feet in front of them, and they'll raise and lower their head to adjust that vision and what they're able to see. And so that would be similar to what we can see. Horses also have a different sense of smell than humans do. So they can smell things more acutely than humans, but less so than dogs. So they have a better sense of smell than humans, but not so much dogs. And they use that sense of smell to identify other horses, humans, potential predators. So that particular sense of smell can have an impact on their mood or the way they behave. They also can surely identify unique smells in feed as it relates to medicine and that sort of thing. And they're very good at sorting that out, as I'm sure you all know. From a taste perspective, horses tend to like sweet and salty tastes. They may avoid toxic plants due to taste or texture, unless there's no alternative. And that's a pretty important fact, I think, that people need to understand when managing horses, is that if there is, horses are primarily designed to graze, and they will find the green things that are available. And given the weather we've had over the last couple of years with drought and everything else, if they can find something green, they'll eat it, and that green thing may or may not be toxic. So they may consume toxic plants if there is nothing else to eat. So making sure that your employees understand that particular piece of information is key too, especially as it relates to managing pastures, managing lots, managing forage, that sort of thing. The horse's sense of hearing is pretty similar to ours, but they do have the ability to rotate their ears 180 degrees, and helping your employees understand that a horse's attention is focused typically where its ears are focused. So if its ears are focused forward, they're interested in something that's in the distance. If its ears are focused back, they're interested in something that's behind them. And keeping an eye on that and learning how to read horses, it can take people a long way to avoiding accidents. Understanding what a horse is in tune with and what they're potentially concerned about is critical to managing horses safely. Horses also can hear cues like whoa or smooches or clucks to encourage them to go forward. But they have to be trained to understand what those things mean. We tell students here all the time that horses don't necessarily come with the software downloaded to know what whoa means. They have to be taught what whoa means. And so if your employees are working with young horses or untrained horses, to expect them to understand whoa or go without having that background information is probably not going to be terribly successful. Horses do have a very highly developed sense of touch, just based, again, on those herd dynamics. And so we can desensitize them with training, and we do. That's how we're able to put saddles on them. That's how we're able to ride them. But that sense of touch is used as a means of communication, both amongst horses and amongst handlers and horses. We cue them with pressure aids like our legs or our hands. And if you combine that sense of touch with the sense of hearing that we just talked about, that's getting at how we train horses. We provide a pressure aid or a touch aid. We combine it with a word. Eventually, we might be able to take that pressure aid away, as in the case of whoa, and then they've now learned the word whoa, but they need to know that ahead of time. So the point I was trying to make through this brief overview of horse behavior is that making sure that workers have a solid handle on basic horse behavior and herd concepts is very important to keep them safe. They need to understand or learn over time how to read horses, and those horse behavior tips can really help in that regard. So it may be that you, as you think about your own facility and best practices, you might want to consider holding a training or having your employees complete online horse behavior training through My Horse University. As I mentioned, we have some archived webinars that are free that you might have your employees watch to help them develop their horse behavior knowledge or their ability to work with horses. eextension.org/horses also has some free online modules, learning lessons, and in some cases, especially with the halter program, which was designed for volunteers but may work well in this regard, certificates of completion can also be printed. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that might be important for you down the road in a few slides. Another thing you may want to consider as a best practice on your farm is the things you require in regards to handling. And requiring consistent methods for all workers is one way that you can do that. At Michigan State, we have roughly 80 horses on the farm, and many of those horses are used for horsemanship classes, training classes, that sort of thing. And so they may be handled by multiple students each week, and they may be handled by multiple students with multiple skill levels. And so we are very stringent about making sure that our horses are caught, haltered, led, and tied the same way by everyone. It's one thing that sometimes our new students find extremely frustrating. They can't believe that they've come all the way to college and now they're learning how to halter a horse. But what we try to reemphasize to them is that every potential employer may have a unique way of doing this. And so their job now is not just to know how to halter a horse, it's to know how to halter a horse the way their employer wants them to do it. The same is true with handling stallions. We have specific requirements as it relates to chains and how chains over the nose potentially are used often with stallions. And that's more a means, it is a means of safety for the handlers. We have very specific turnout procedures that you may want to follow or that we follow, and you may have your own procedures that you want to follow. And it's important that you model these methods. The other key piece to remember is that people that are working on farms and people that are working on our farm at Michigan State may be coming from a background that doesn't have the level of agriculture that people had 15 or 20 years ago. For a time when I first started working at Michigan State, the assumption was that people had these basic handling skills. But as people get further and further away from farms, and in this case horse farms, they may need to have these basic skills taught to them and modeled consistently. And so just to give you an example of one of the haltering videos that we use, I'm going to have Lauren go ahead and play this video. This is our barn manager, and I should probably mute my mic for this, I think.
All right, we're going to talk about approaching and putting a halter on this horse. And one of the things I like to do here at Michigan State University is I buy these halters without a lot of snaps and buckles on them. One, I find that they last longer. Two, I like to discourage our students from putting the halter on by going over the horse's ears. I know it's a very common way to halter, but becomes problematic for us as I have so many students haltering so many horses that the halter is not assigned to a horse. They might be putting a halter that's adjusted too small on a horse and pulling it over the ears and causing some ear issues. So we'll talk about how we like to halter horses here. So just some basic guidelines is you want to make sure you're approaching hopefully at the shoulder of the horse, between the head and the shoulder. The neck is okay too, but avoiding approaching the horse directly from behind, because the horse can't see you. If you have no choice but to go to the hind quarter of the horse to approach it, making sure that you've said something to this horse, you recognize that the horse has turned its head and acknowledge that you're there before you actually just get so close that they can go ahead and kick you, as that can cause some problems. So this horse has got her head down. I'm going to walk up. I'm going to kind of just maybe push her over a little bit, get myself in a safer position to halter. Now, when I teach folks to halter, I like to have them approach the left side, take their right hand and go over the horse's neck, grab the crown piece of the halter, and scoop the horse's nose up, and then buckle this halter completely. Okay. Taking this halter, making sure that, again, we look at this facial bone right here, or about 2 fingers below that, and that none of the parts of the halter are overly tight. Now, the reason I like to halter in this manner is that if this horse is wanting to walk away from me, our broodmares are like that I actually have a way to control where this horse is going. If I'm catching a horse in a pen and I've got other horses around, that if I need to move the horse out of the way, I've got a way to do that. If I haltered the horse in this manner, I don't have the ability to do that. She could easily duck out of the halter, and then flipping this crown piece over all the time, and you kind of saw that slapped her on the neck. With some horses, it's going to be a turnoff and they're not going to want you to catch them. So again, I like to walk up, put my hand on their neck, let them know I'm here, take my right hand, reach over the neck, grab the crown piece of the halter, scoop their neck up, and then buckle. I don't use the lead rope around their neck very often to catch them, as this now becomes difficult for me, who can hardly chew gum and walk, because now I'm holding the rope around her neck and then I'm trying to fiddle with the halter. So I like this technique that I just demonstrated to you, because I can do this in one smooth type of movement. And it does take a little practice, and the horses here at MSU, many of them will just, once they see the nose band, they'll just kind of scoop their nose right up into it. So it becomes a very safe way to halter.
Okay. So I apologize. I think some of you may have had some problems. It may have been a connectivity issue, or it could have been related to the number of people we have on the webinar or something to that effect. But the real point of the video was just to let you know that we have these kinds of clips through My Horse University on YouTube, number one. Number two, I'm not telling you this is how you have to halter every horse, every time, everywhere. But what I am suggesting is, videos are fairly easy to make. If you've got a large number of employees, you may want to make a video of yourself or someone on your farm haltering or catching or turning out horses the way you'd like it done. And it's pretty easy for your employees to then watch that video and have an understanding of what your expectations are. So that was the main point, not to try to teach you, again, for those of you who are thinking, I didn't come on this webinar so that I could learn to halter a horse. That was not the point. Or maybe some of you watched that method and thought, this would be a pretty good method to use. Maybe we'll start to do this. Either way. And so once you have the horse haltered and you are considering horses in groups, you may or may not have them haltered. Horses in groups can definitely be a dangerous time for your employees, potentially for the horses themselves. But with an understanding of horse behavior and herd dynamics, that can make it less dangerous, potentially. If you know who the dominant horse is, if your employees know who the dominant horses are, if they have a good recognition of horse behavior and the expressions that horses will use to demonstrate agitation or to try to assert dominance, your employees will be able to stay out of the way or get out of the way or make sure they don't put themselves in a bad position to get hurt. And the way that you can assure employee safety in these particular situations is to demonstrate the specific ways you want horses caught on your facility and how you'd like to have them turned out, especially when in groups. It may be that the way your gates are set up, you want to make sure that your employees lead the horses all the way through the gate, turn and face the gate, keep the horse facing the gate, take the halter off, and then let them go. Or you may have another method that you prefer. But making sure that your employees understand what that method is a best practice. So then we'll move on to feeding because that is often an important task that employees are asked to do. And I've always wondered what happened right after they took this picture. When I look at it, I can only see bad things with flipping wheelbarrows going on, but it did make the point as a transition slide for feeding practices. So some things to consider when feeding is to make sure, as a best practice, that you use a minimum of 2 employees feeding, if at all possible, especially on large facilities or where they're going outside to pastures. It may be dark, although we'll be at daylight savings time soon. Yay! But that way, if someone does get hurt, there's someone there to help or that's aware of what's going on. So a minimum of 2 if you can swing it from a safety perspective and also from an efficiency perspective. One person can potentially be haying while the other one is emptying buckets and watering or is responsible for grain. And that can make, once you've got that routine down, in addition to being a safe facility, it can also be very efficient. Further feeding practices and potential best practices are to prepare evening feed in the morning or the next morning in the afternoon if possible. In some scenarios, I completely recognize that it isn't always an option. We do this at my home farm on occasion, but don't always like to put the feed in the stall. We prepare it and then leave it just outside the stall in case we want to bring horses in. We have a limited number of stalls. They go into the same stall every time. And so you wouldn't want someone's dinner in there in that scenario necessarily. In other cases, you would have to do this, have to prepare a morning feeding the evening before for situations like feeding beet pulp if you're soaking it and that sort of thing. So developing these kinds of routines with your employees would definitely be a best practice. Helping your employees understand safe lifting would be another thing you may consider as a best practice on your farm. So we have links, and Lauren, there's a link on the next slide. If you can potentially share it in the chat pod, that might be helpful too for people to get at later. But just the basics of safe lifting and handling. So making sure that your employees consider the load and check the conditions. Don't try to lift it by yourself if it's too heavy or awkward. Making sure there's enough space for movement and that they have good footing so that they don't trip or stumble over an obstacle. Making sure that their balance is good and that their feet should be shoulder width apart, bending at the knees to lift. And Jackie asked, why is this a recommended practice? As someone who has the potential for back injuries, which back injuries can take your employees out of commission for an extended period of time. If you don't know how to properly lift hay or 50-pound bags of grain, you may have an injured employee on your hands, and hence an injured employee means that you may have to do the work, depending on how many volunteers or how many employees you have. So that's why it's important to suggest or make sure that your employees know how to lift. Okay, now I understand. The question about preparing feed ahead of time, that would be more of an efficiency perspective than a safety perspective. It can be more efficient depending on the number of horses and the number of employees you're looking at to make sure that, like in the case of Michigan State, we have outsides and insides, so horses that are out and horses that are in. And if we can prepare evening outsides earlier in the day, it takes probably half an hour, 45 minutes to do that. So if you can get it done before you actually need to take the feed out, it'll improve the efficiency. But that's a good question. That wasn't necessarily related to safety. It was best practices more from an efficiency perspective. So moving back to the lifting piece, you can go through, I won't read every single bullet point here in regards to how to lift, but making sure that your employees are trained in how to lift is a key piece of keeping them safe on a farm. There are a lot of things to lift, as you all know, and so making sure that it's done correctly. And one thing I had forgotten about, and maybe that's why I have back issues, is carrying the load close to your body and not twisting your body while carrying it. So that's a key piece of proper lifting. Another potential best practice would be related to drugs and chemicals. It's important from an employee safety perspective, but also from a horse safety perspective, to make sure that the drugs or chemicals that you have on your farm are properly labeled, that we're notorious in the horse industry for having lots of spray bottles that may or may not be labeled. And so trying to make a point of labeling those things is a best practice for sure. Keeping those things in safe, organized cabinets or areas that are at least out of sight in high traffic areas is also beneficial. And giving special consideration to things like Regimate, which I was going to say for this group may not be used particularly frequently, as we have no one with a breeding farm, but that wouldn't be true. It's not unusual for Regimate to be used with mares in training barns for attitude reasons and such, and to prevent them from coming into estrus and hence being easier to show and handle. So if you are using things like Regimate, making sure that your employees have access to disposable gloves, disposable syringes, knowing how to use the product, and actually being told why, especially for females that are handling it, why it's important that they use those gloves is a key best practice. Also true, not so much from the gloves and syringes perspective, but Banamine should be clearly labeled, Bute should be clearly labeled, and making sure that your employees know how to use those products if they're asked to do so is key and is a best practice you may want to consider, i.e. making sure they understand what those drugs are for and how they're used if they don't already know. So as it relates to drugs specifically, they should be handled by adults or with adult supervision. And as an employer, it's important that you watch someone administer medications before allowing them to do so on their own. Not everyone, again, as we get further and further away from farms, not everyone has ever had to give their horse Banamine, for example. Or they may have provided a horse with Banamine paste, but may not be familiar with injectable Banamine. So making sure that they know that injectable is an option. It may be that on your farm, injectable Banamine is the preferred option because it does act much more quickly in the horse. But if you were to ask an employee, do you know how to administer Banamine? They might say yes. But you may find out at the wrong time that what they know how to do is administer paste Banamine. So clarifying those particular issues with your employees is a best practice. Also, the use of sharps containers for used needles and medical waste is an important practice to put in place. You can purchase sharps containers on Amazon and many other places, I'm sure, but Amazon, I did not know until putting this talk together that you could buy sharps containers on Amazon, but I guess what can't you buy on Amazon? And you can also then have the service so that you can send your container back and have it appropriately disposed of. So making sure that you train employees on the proper use of sharps containers as it relates especially to medical waste and appropriate disposal would definitely be a best practice as well. Moving on to the machinery and equipment section. The main machinery and equipment that primarily would be used on an equine facility would be tractors, spreaders, mowers, that sort of thing. And having some basic tractor safety knowledge will be important to your employees. So if they're responsible for using the tractor, it's some basic general tips. Know your tractor and keep it in good shape. The use of rollover protection. Making sure that your employees are familiar with the terrain. They may develop that over time, but if you know there are particular areas in pastures or places where you commonly spread manure and that sort of thing that may have some dips or valleys in them, helping your employees know the area so that they can avoid potential accidents or injuries is key. Making sure that the PTO drive is properly shielded. That is a huge culprit as it relates to on-farm accidents. For those of you that aren't familiar with the PTO, that is the thing, especially in PTO-driven manure spreaders would primarily be, or in hay balers and that sort of thing, that makes the machinery move, and it attaches to the tractor and then spins around really, really fast. If it doesn't have a shield, it's not unusual for people to have gotten clothing caught in a PTO or clothing and then arms and that sort of thing. And so making sure that it's properly shielded and that your employees understand how important that is critical, because once someone is caught in a PTO, you can't stop it quickly. And so nobody wants that. And making sure that your employees know never to jump off a moving tractor. Runaway tractors can cause very serious injuries. And dressing properly, especially, again, when working with a PTO. Loose sweatshirts, loose clothing are just a bad combination with a functional PTO. Making sure that you choose your operator wisely and taking the time to help your employees learn to drive the tractor, learn the details of what they're going to be asked to do, how to position a tractor to back a manure spreader in, for example. We have some barns at Michigan State that have met more collisions with people learning to back up manure spreaders than we care to count. But fortunately, they're still standing. And we are a teaching facility, so we take the time to do that. And it is a best practice. Ultimately, they'll get it, but any tips that you can provide are certainly appreciated by those people. No riders on tractors from a safety perspective. The riders on tractors can result in accidents and injuries. And then again, going back to knowing the terrain, knowing the curves, making sure that appropriate speed is used, understanding that holes and puddles and snow this time of year, or especially puddles and mud situations, you don't always know what's underneath that puddle or how deep it is. So if you hit it just wrong with a tractor, that can be a potentially dangerous situation. So making sure that your employees are trained in that regard. A few other environmental hazards, especially this time of year in Michigan. I see some of you are from warmer climates, but wash racks can be extremely slippery and potentially dangerous for horses and humans, especially horses with shoes on. And some of these safety tips are also for horse safety. We've tried to focus most on employee safety. However, if a horse slips and falls in a wash rack, they potentially could take an employee down with them. So keeping an eye on those sorts of things, making sure you have grooved concrete or potential mats in your wash racks. And again, barn floors as well. Ungrooved barn floors can be potentially dangerous to horses and maybe humans as well. And again, especially horses with shoes on. Ice and mud this time of year. I think my poor horse, who has shoes on his front feet only this time of year, is just convinced that the world has ended, because the poor guy, up until today, he hadn't been out for 4 or 5 days, and that was primarily related to the ice on the way to the lots. So making sure that your employees understand that horses may have a difficult time negotiating ice, or getting them to and from turnout lots. If the turnout lots are good, helping them understand that it's important to lead horses on the snow as opposed to the actual ice piece, or choosing their path to and from lots when leading horses can be beneficial and something to talk to them about. But again, if you live in an icy area, you become very I'll just say anal, I guess, very in tune with the weather and the conditions between the barn and the turnout lots, if that is in fact what you do. I know too many people who have had horses go down and actually had to be euthanized because of slipping on the ice. So you get very fixated on those kinds of things. Some suggested follow-up. So at the end of this webinar, I hope you'll just maybe take a few minutes to think about potential best practices in your facility. Maybe they're these things, but maybe there are other things that you may want to make a list of as homework, but I won't be quizzing you or checking up on you. But as potential homework to establishing best practices in your own facility. Some of those things could include, if you haven't already done so, developing and posting barn rules and procedures. Making sure you have a dry erase or chalkboard in the barn with notes regarding what has been done, what needs to be done, maybe horses that now have medicine sheets that are being treated ongoingly for something that your employees, if you have different employees in the morning than you do in the evening, that they might need to know about. Potentially consider training meetings specific to your own farm. And one of the ways, for those of you that participated in the other webinars, having records of training and who attended can be very useful to you down the road should you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of a lawsuit because you have a volunteer or an employee who was injured. Having training meetings regarding safety issues and keeping records of who attended those potentially could be evidence of your safety consciousness if you needed to prove that somewhere down the road, which, heaven forbid, hopefully you never have to do. But it's better to have that information and not need it than to need it and not have it. Some of these kinds of training opportunities, I would say, given the uniqueness of every facility, much of it would be things that are specific to yours. Or to your own situation, but you also may want to use some of the training opportunities that we've put together, again, through eextensionhorse.org, which has multiple learning lessons on it on a variety of topics. My Horse University webinars and courses. We have a webinar that comes to mind on tractor safety that Aaron Yoder from Penn State did, and it may be, if you have a once-a-month meeting with your employees, maybe one of the months you watch that webinar. That could potentially be very useful. We also have an online course for youth working on equine facilities that will be available in April. And it's a 10-module course over a variety of different things, including many of the things that we've talked about this evening. And those who go through that course will be able to print a certificate for each module. So if you view that course, you may decide that you'd like your employees to take maybe all of them, maybe 5 of the modules within, and you may ask that your employees provide you with a certificate once they've finished it. Again, not because you need to have a regulatory process, but because you would have potential verification that you attempted to and did provide training opportunities for your employees and you have documentation that they went through that program, should you find yourself in a lawsuit down the road, that could be supporting documentation. And I think with that, I have come to the end of the presentation portion. We have a couple more slides to go through, and then we'll switch to some questions. But Lauren, did you, or I can just go through these particular slides. You'll receive a survey by email in the next couple of weeks, and we ask that you give us your feedback on all of the Equine Business Network webcasts that you've attended so that we can better serve you in the future and maybe adjust the topic areas down the road. I am going to turn this mic over to Lauren.
Yep. Thank you, Karen. And we'd like to thank you for your presentation this evening, and thank everyone else for their participation and for joining us tonight. Just a note that the quiz and certificate for weeks 1 through 4 they're all now available in the course site. The quiz and certificate for week 5 will be available early next week, as we need to create the questions based on the presentation this evening. And join the Equine Business Network on Facebook, Twitter, and read our blog for the most up-to-date information on our events, courses, and more. Again, this was the last webinar in the Horse Industry Labor Force series, but it will be recorded and uploaded to the EBN course site. Feel free to send us your comments and suggestions to info.myhorseuniversity.com. And if anyone else has any more questions, I'm going to let them go ahead and type it in the chat. Where do we find the archived webcasts and quizzes? That will be in the course site. So when you actually go and log in to what is the Angel system that MSU uses, if you go back to the week 5, you'll be able to see the links and the quizzes for the previous weeks too. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat.
Okay, Hillary has a question. And for those that have employees, and it could be for everyone, and so you can all get involved in the chat part too, but she says, do you find that posting rules in the barn is the best way to communicate? From my perspective, I think it's important to post the rules in the barn, but the best way to communicate is face-to-face with your employees if possible, or I would say through a dry erase board or some more written means would be my perspective on that, but I'm sure maybe the others have suggestions too. But even just making sure that you have those rules and that they're posted in the barn would be a good reminder, but it wouldn't be a good form of two-way communication, I don't think. Thank you, Jen. And thank you again to all of you for coming. I really appreciate your taking the time. Looks like a lot of the questions, Lauren, are related to the certificates and the quizzes, so I'm not going to pretend to answer those questions.
Okay, as far as the quizzes go and the certificates, we are going to send out an email blast next week, kind of wrapping the series up. That's when you'll get the survey sometime in the next few weeks, and we will have links specifically to the quizzes from the previous weeks, the presentations from the previous weeks, and some information on printing out the certificates. All right, thanks again to Karen, and thank you all, and we hope you all have a great night.
Good night, everyone.